the conservatives and Republicans in particular talk about return to traditional values. Why don't we return to the Eisenhower values and the Kennedy values and the Nixon values of 74% top tax rate after you've made your first $3 million, it starts going up to that, and corporations paying, they used to pay 30% of the federal income, now they're paying 11%. Corporations, bellying up to the bar too.
Well, the easy answer to that question is no matter what the tax rates are, you're still going to collect 18% of GDP, no matter what. I mean, the statistics don't lie. True. Oh, it's most certainly is true. Statistical trends show that GDP.
You're telling me that we were collecting 18% of GDP during the Lincoln administration?
Not since World War II. Since World War II. So you mentioned LBJ, you mentioned Eisenhower. Since World War II, roughly speaking, we collect about 18% of GDP. So it's not a question of tax rates, which liberals are just fascinated with tax rates. It's a question of two things. First, making sure the GDP increases, which is what Reaganomics did. The other question is, what do we do to make sure GDP increases?
The 80s was the first decade. No. Excuse me. You had 3.2, 3.1, and 3.2% respectively increases in GDP during the decade of the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. The decade of the 80s, it was below 3%. It was the first time in 40 years it had been below 3%.
There's a recession that came.
I understand. Reagan had a great little recession. But if you're right, let's say that you're right. It's always 18%. Yep. If it's always 18%, then what that means is that during that Eisenhower, Nixon, Kennedy, Johnson era, that middle-class people were not paying as much of that 18%, and rich people were paying more because they were only making 30 times what working people were making. Yep. And now the rich people are paying a lot less and working people are paying more. What's good about that?
We're still collecting the same in tax revenue.
Except that you're sticking it to the working people instead of the rich people.
And I think the important point is that when you adjust the tax rate such that richer people are paying less and poor people are paying more, you actually have less money in the economy that's working. Poor people tend to spend money when they have more money. Richer people invest it. They put it in offshore accounts, or they move it places where it's not in part of the American economy.
Right. So, Neil, you're waving your hand over here.
This is a